Hello there. Thank you for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of the 2024 election. My name is Bobby Lucier. This program is a part of a series of candidate forums that we are bringing you in advance of the November 5th election this year. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. Thank you to those folks. You can find all of our forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning in on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and stay tuned into local democracy this election season. On tonight's program, we'll hear from two candidates running for the Chittenden North Senate seat, and those candidates are Irene Wrenner and Chris Mattos. Thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Awesome. So we've prepared a list of questions for each of you that you both received, and you'll have 90 seconds to answer each question. Rebuttals will be allowed only if one of you, if a candidate is named directly, in which case you'll have 30 seconds to respond. And if you're tuning in live, we welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. If you call in, we'll do our best to prioritize your question. We'll screen calls to ensure that questions are not repeated from what we've already asked, and we also ask that you share your name, the town you live in, and that your question be directed at both of the candidates here, not just one in particular. You can submit questions for future forums, by the way, at cctv.org/general. So with that, let's jump in. Let's get started with 1-minute opening statements, and we'll start with you, Senator Irene Wrenner.
Thank you, Bobby. My name is Irene Wrenner. I serve as the sole senator for Chittenden North. Residents here deserve a senator who has reliably served them both in local and state government. Over the past 19 years, I've knocked on doors in 2 different 22-person districts, and I've listened at length to understand what it is that is important to these people. I've used that knowledge to work on my constituents' behalf, devising creative, common sense policies and frugal budgets. I vote as an independent in the spirit of nonpartisanship. While Democrats hold a majority of seats in the State House, they do not tell me how to vote. My constituents do. As a first-term senator, I introduced 7 bills, 3 of which passed, 1 of which updates the regulations for car seat use by small children. This bill will save lives.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Irene Wrenner. Chris Mattos, your 60-second opening statement.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm State Representative Chris Mattos. I was appointed in 2017 by Governor Scott to serve the community of Milton. Since then, I've been reelected 3 times, and most recently, now I serve a small portion of Georgia after redistricting. I live in Milton with my wife, Carrie, and our son, Cash, and I'm a small business owner. I have a property management business as well as an excavation business, and I'm also a licensed real estate agent. I'm running for the Senate because I'm worried about the affordability in Vermont. With the property tax rates going up by almost 14%, the DMV fees going up by 20%, and an $80 million payroll tax, I want to work with Governor Scott and continue to build on making Vermont affordable, and I look forward to serving you as your next state senator.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here and for running for office. We do have a question from a caller already. Hello there, caller. You're on Town Meeting TV. Can you share your name and where you're calling from?
My name is Juna, and I live in Chittenden County.
Great. Thank you so much. Can you share what your question is for both of the candidates tonight?
In 2022, 70% of voters in Vermont were in favor of the Prop 5 bill and the protection of reproductive rights. Mattos voted no on this bill, while Wrenner voted yes. My question is, will you stay committed to advocating for the majority of Vermonters who want to protect reproductive rights?
Thank you very much for your question. We'll start with you, Chris Mattos. Your thoughts on protecting reproductive rights?
Yeah, absolutely. We take an oath of office when we're elected, and I uphold the Constitution of the state of Vermont, and I'll do just that going forward as your next state senator.
Thank you, Chris. Irene Wrenner, your response on the question of protecting reproductive rights.
As a woman, I know deeply how important it is to have control of my own body and to keep the government out of my bedroom and out of the doctor's office. I have always been committed personally to the right of a person to choose how they reproduce and when, and I believe that The voters of Vermont surprised some of us back in 2022. We saw a lot of no signs, but the vote was resounding 70%. So I will absolutely not just honor my own personal commitment to choice for women and others, but honor the voters' will. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for those responses. We'll start now with our first question on this list here, which is about property taxes and education. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes in the coming fiscal year in session? And we'll start with Irene Wrenner.
Thank you, Bobby. My opponent sat on the Ways and Means Committee for 4 years, while I had no direct responsibility for education funding. But upon re-election, I will be asked to be assigned to the Senate Finance Committee because I think it's so important that we simplify the education formula and that we cut back where needed on education spending. I think some forensic audits are in order after I've talked to a number of teachers at their front door that have told me where they see waste. Speaking of property taxes, I understand that some people want you to believe that the legislature had the option of not funding the school budgets. Here's how the process actually works. Legislators are asked to approve a homestead tax rate in order to fund the spending that's approved statewide by voters in their school districts. Voting no as a body just is not an option. Nevertheless, a few lawmakers did decide to vote no themselves. They knew they could count on the majority to stick their necks out and do what was right by voting yes. The no voters are now campaigning on a platform of, I didn't raise your taxes, without being forthcoming about what a no vote really means. Anyone who voted no on school funding expenses on funding the school expenses with current dollars was actually relegating us to borrow money to keep the schools open. I bristle at the fact that we have a huge national deficit, and the last thing I want to do is have my state borrowing $50, $60, or $70 million at today's interest rates to keep our schools open. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Chris, your thoughts on property taxes and education?
Yeah, so it's a real big problem in the state of Vermont with our education finance system, and property taxes going up by almost 14% across the state. And our wages are only going up by about 4%. And as you may know, 70% of homestead property taxpayers pay based on income. And I have been on the Ways and Means Committee for the past 4 years, and I've been working to make this system more easy to follow because, as we know, it is a very complicated system. And we actually had a proposal put on the table. Representative Scott Beck out of St. Johnsbury came up with a very common sense approach for this, and it was to more closely tie your property tax rates to your local spending. And we discussed this on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday there was a meeting with legislative leaders and advocates. Thursday, we came back into committee, no longer had that bill. It was turned into a study, and we were off the tracks of real reform. This happens every year. We go back and forth about funding education, and in this bill that was passed by the legislature, it actually does take $24 million out of next year's budgets because we had to buy down tax rates to be able to help with the pupil weighting study. So we're already seeing those issues come forth where if we didn't pass a bill, we would be in trouble, and we would have had to pass a bill anyhow to get out of the building by June 30th.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for your responses on that question. We have another caller here with a question. Hello there, you're on Town Meeting TV. Can you share your name and where you're calling from?
Hi, my name is Dawn, and I'm calling from Essex.
Thank you, Dawn. Can you share what your question is for both of the candidates tonight?
Yes. One particularly effective way of reaching constituents is to go to where they are, knocking on their doors, meeting them on their front porches, going inside, talking to them where they live about what their issues are. Could each of the candidates please describe what they have done prior to this election to reach out to people using this method?
Thank you so much, Dawn. We'll start with Chris Mattos here. What you've done to engage constituents this election cycle.
Yeah, thank you for the call, Dawn. I've done many different things. I've talked with friends and neighbors. I've gone knocking on doors. I've had events where we have local meet and greets in various towns. We've been to Essex. We've been to Fairfax. We've been to Westford, and I'm based in Milton and see folks all the time. And we also have been, through my conversations, I'm also on the Board of Civil Authority, I'm a Justice of the Peace, and I also serve on the Milton Family Community Center Board. So I'm active in my community and I get out and meet folks. My office is right on Main Street. People stop in all the time, so I'm very accessible and I like to get out and meet new people every day, not just during campaign season.
Thank you, Chris. Irene, your progress on engaging constituents this election cycle.
Thank you, Bobby. Like my opponent, I also am engaged year-round in my communities. You'll see me at the senior lunches in Westford, the concerts there. You'll see me doing the egg run in Fairfax, although I do walk it. I spoke at their Juneteenth festival. I go to a number of meetings in Milton, that being the biggest community that I serve. All kinds of forums there, whether it's the music in the park. There's a lot of public ways to engage, of course, and in my own town of Essex. I have also partnered with state reps to do a number of outings, meet the candidate type of things in all 4 towns. Door knocking is something that I love to do because I learned so much from people. And in fact, when I knocked on 2,500 doors last summer, I could say to people, just checking in, I've got a year under my belt and I've got another year left. What can I still do for you? And so that was a really great way for me to just ground myself in some of what was going on in the State House. And I could show up as I did in the State House and say, Vermonters don't feel like they can afford to live here anymore, as I spoke against the renewable energy standard. And so I had to vote no on that, even though that was not my party's platform. It was what I heard on the streets. And I think that's just invaluable.
Great. Thank you both so much. And thank you for engaging with folks in our community. We have another call here, which is a good sign, means that folks are tuned in and interested in this election. Hello there. You're on Town Meeting
Hello.
TV. Can you share your name and where you're calling from?
Nick from Fairfax in this district.
Great. Can you share your question for both the candidates tonight?
Yes, I'm wondering if the candidates favor increasing minimum wage to keep up with inflation. I understand Representative Mattos voted against it while he was in the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Nick, and we'll start with Irene Wrenner on this question about minimum wage, raising the minimum wage.
Yes, while I wasn't in the legislature to vote on that, I've actually spoken in favor of raising the wage of legislators. Unlike the publicity you may have seen, I did not vote to raise my own pay. I voted to raise the pay of people who would come 4 years after 2023, which is when we voted on that. And we voted on that before we knew about the incredible tax increase that was headed our way this year. So I would have to pause before I asked taxpayers to vote on anything like that ever again. But indeed, I believe in a living wage for all workers, and given how hard people work in the legislature and the fact that people have to juggle sometimes the jobs that pay their mortgage with the job that they have as a legislator, it makes it very difficult for them to answer emails at night or to get back to constituents or even to prepare for the next day's committee work when they're using their out of the State House time at night to work on the job that pays the bills. So I am an advocate for paying a higher wage to the people who do the work of the legislature, and I wonder if indeed we could attract more people to this profession if we paid a little bit more. We have so many younger representatives and senators who leave because they cannot afford to make ends meet with the salaries that we have now, which, by the way, are $15,100 for the 4.5 months we're in session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Chris, your thoughts on raising the minimum wage?
Yeah, I think, Nick, thanks for the call. I think I got this phone call on the radio recently from the same caller here. It's great to hear from Nick again. But I did vote against that, and I have seen it play out in the workforce nowadays that $15 minimum wage. I run an excavation business. I would not be able to hire anyone for $15 an hour, and it's worked out where just the marketplace has increased wages itself, and the high cost of living in Vermont, you cannot afford to live here on minimum wage. And as for the legislature, I do work full-time year-round. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I need to continue working. It's true, we make $15,000 a year for salary, but I would like to know how many folks get reimbursed for their expenses when they go to work every day. We get per diems for meals, we get per diems for staying down in Montpelier, we get mileage reimbursement. It adds up, and it's a lot more than $15,000. And in the future, I would like to continue as being the state senator for Chittenden North because I am a working father. I know what people are going through. I have to deal with it in my business. I have to deal with it paying for childcare. And I think it's important to have folks that are feeling the everyday impacts of what we do in Montpelier be in the building itself.
Thank you both very much. We'll now move, I don't think we have any calls at this point. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a question about housing. This past session, Democrats and progressives in the Vermont House proposed spending an additional $100 million per year for 10 years on publicly subsidized affordable housing. This level of investment was not passed in the Senate, however. Would you support this level of public investment in housing? We'll start with you, Chris.
Yeah, you know, housing's near and dear to me. And everything that I do revolves around residential housing, whether it's helping somebody find an apartment or finding their first home. And it's very, very important that folks have those options that are out there. And we've invested a tremendous amount of money into workforce housing over the past several years, which I do support. But we can't just keep throwing money at the problem and think it's going to solve itself. We need to be focused on increasing the supply of homes in the future, and that will in turn hopefully bring down prices of homes because it is very, very expensive to purchase land, build a home, buy a home in this state. This past session, tripartisan group of legislators came together, and it was spearheaded by Representative Ashley Bartley in Fairfax that would have reduced the red tape to be able to get new houses permitted. But unfortunately, that bill was shelved. There was a bill that was put through by the supermajority that then actually made it harder in some areas of the state to be able to build new units of housing. So Governor Scott vetoed this bill. I stood with the governor on this, and I want to make sure that Vermonters can get into homes that they can afford. Builders can be able to build these because without homes, we don't have places for people to live and work and be able to grow Vermont into the future.
Thank you, Chris. Irene Wrenner, your thoughts on housing and this level of investment?
Thank you, Bobby. I too stood and sustained the governor's veto on that particular bill. We definitely need quality housing for those who are not yet making a livable wage. It's been brought to my attention by some residents that we might want to discuss some residency requirements to make sure that people aren't just moving to Vermont from somewhere else to get a free apartment. I'm told we've already allocated about $300 million to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board toward this issue, but those funds are constrained. They have to go to nonprofits, and right now there's apparently a big backlog of funding awaiting actual use because there aren't as many nonprofits as there might be to spend it in a timely fashion. So I wonder if we want to expand the eligibility to access that money to some private developers with lots of caveats and controls in place. And that way, maybe expedite building these houses so that we can get them sooner rather than later.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Let's change it up a little bit and jump to our lightning round of quick questions here. These are yes or no questions or short questions, less than 10 seconds each, if you can manage it. And we'll start with Irene for this first question. Should private schools be funded with public dollars, yes or no?
Only if they clear the same bars for admission that public schools do.
Chris?
To the extent that already exists with a number of independent schools.
And we'll start with Chris for this next question. Do you support raising the age of family court jurisdiction?
No, I don't. DCF doesn't have the available resources to be able to work with the young adults that are in the pipeline with kids.
Irene?
I serve on a Justice Oversight Committee, and we are still deliberating about this as we speak. So I'm leaning yes,
position?
but I absolutely would like to change my mind should I, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, learn something different.
Further deliberations.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the next question here. Oh, it looks like we've got a phone call. So I'm going to actually just pause our lightning round here and answer this phone call. Hello there. You are on Town Meeting TV. Can you share your name and where you're calling from?
My name is Iris. I'm calling from Essex.
Thank you, Iris. Can you share your questions for both of the candidates tonight?
Yes, if they could describe their most significant accomplishments and explain why voters should select them to be their state senator.
Okay, thank you, Iris. And we'll start with Irene, because you just finished answering the last question. So your most significant accomplishment, Irene.
Wow. I think getting up to speed in the Senate. It's a lot to. And as I mentioned before, I got 3 bills passed. All of the bills, all 7 bills that I introduced came from people living in the district or working in the district who approached me with that idea. I didn't go to the State House to promote my own ideas. I went there to be that voice for people who didn't feel really heard before when they had 6 senators, mostly from Burlington on the Chittenden side, and the Fairfax folks had 2 senators. And again, I love the accessibility of having a single seat district so that I have direct accountability and a lot more knowledge about every individual voter. And so I feel like bringing that voice to Montpelier that has not been heard and being an independent in a district that's purple.
Thank you so much, Irene. Chris, your most significant accomplishment that qualifies you to serve in the Senate.
Yeah, I think the most significant thing that I was able to be a part of wasn't even legislation at all. It was during the COVID-19 pandemic. The legislature was tasked. There was a group of us that were put together helping unemployment. That was a big backlog with the Department of Labor. And we were tasked, it was probably 20 to 30 of us that were tasked with calling Vermonters all over the state to be able to help them out. Very, very high level, helping, not getting into the systems at all, but being able to help folks get through to the Department of Labor and be able to get their benefits that they really needed at a time when a lot of folks were hurting. So that was one of my biggest joys. I still have people that come up to me somewhere in Milton and they say, hey, I remember when you helped me back at COVID-19 with my unemployment.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for your response to that question. Let's jump back into some of these quicker lightning round questions. And we'll start with you, Chris, on this next question. Should biomass, meaning burning wood, play a role in emissions reduction strategies for the state?
Yes, I think it should.
Irene, should biomass play a role?
We should stop burning wood to make electricity, and we should welcome super efficient wood stoves for heating.
Great. Thank you. Do you support a statewide ban on assault weapons? And we'll start with Irene.
Yes.
Chris?
Vermont has a lot of restrictions in place already, and I do not support expanding them more.
Did Governor Scott overstep his authority by appointing Zoe Saunders as interim education secretary? Starting with you here, Chris.
The Vermont Supreme Court just issued a ruling on that, and he was well within his right as governor to do that.
Thanks, Chris. Irene, your thoughts on this?
This matter is still being decided by the courts. I believe there will be an appeal.
Okay, and Irene, where do you get your news?
VT Digger, Vermont Public, Vermont This Week, Vermont Business Magazine, and for local issues, Front Porch Forum, Facebook.
Great, thank you, Irene. Chris, where do you get your news?
Much of the same. Local news outlets, listen to the local radio, WVMT, WDEV, those sorts of things.
Great, thank you both. Do you ride the bus, Chris?
With my job, I cannot ride the bus unless they have a trailer hitch to be able to haul my excavator around.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Irene, do you ride the bus at all?
Not since I taught my teenagers how to ride it, but I am sorry to see the routes being cut.
And last one here, kind of a fun one, or contentious, maybe the most contentious question of the night. What's your favorite ice cream made in Vermont? We'll start with you, Irene.
Well, I entered a flavor contest with Ben & Jerry's a long time ago, and they still haven't made this flavor, so I guess I'm not popular enough. It would be Red Hot cinnamon candies in vanilla ice cream.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Chris, your favorite ice cream in Vermont?
It's got to be the maple creamy, hands down for me.
Is there a specific stand that you really like?
You know, I really enjoy Allen Home up in South Hero.
Yeah,
it's a fantastic maple creamy up there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you both so much. We've got maybe time for 1 or 2 more questions. Let's move to the question on public safety and criminal justice. Public safety is a top priority for many voters in this election. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What more needs to be done by the legislature to advance public safety and repair Vermont's criminal justice system? And we'll start with you, Chris Mattos.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work in the past session on public safety, but there's still more work to be done. We need to also hold our state's attorneys accountable, and we should be getting reports from them on what kind of crimes they're dealing with. That way, if there needs to be something done in the legislature, we can act on that. We also need to stop with raising the age laws and increasing age limits on different population sets based on what the crime is. And then we also need to work on the catch and release policies that we've seen around. Somebody commits a violent crime, and shortly after they're taken in, they're let right back out into the community, which is not safe for our communities, and we need to continue work on that. We've done some work on retail theft, which is I'm hoping would be a help, because I've heard stories, of places in Williston where they just don't have the capacity to be able to respond to all of these incidents, so I'm hoping it does crack down on that some. But I'm looking forward to working with the governor more on putting the safety of our communities first and being able to make sure law enforcement has all the resources that they need to be able to respond.
Thank you, Chris. Irene, your thoughts on public safety and criminal justice?
To me, public safety is a feeling that a person has when they walk down Church Street, for example, and they see drug-related debris, or they hear concerning news reports, or they themselves feel violated because of a crime that's perpetrated against them. I think we need to fully fund police forces that are dealing with ever more serious crime. Of course, not every call should be answered by a cop with a gun. De-escalation skills are essential. What we did in Essex was arrange with the Howard Center Street team to come and deal with folks when there were more mental health issues that were happening on the streets. And I think we need to fund both mental health and law enforcement together, because they are indeed tied very closely. We could use a new model of dealing with persons who are pre-trial or pre-sentencing. We can't afford to lock up everyone as they wait for a court date, but they do need vigilant supervision, such as in a group home, so that they're not out perpetrating crime on crime while they're waiting for that first trial. We see that happen too often. Another factor is restitution. That's also not working well. The process needs to be more transparent. There needs to be more accountability, and it needs to be more timely. Someone whose vehicle has been damaged, for example, shouldn't have to wait months to have it restored. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. I think we've got time for one more question here, and it'll be a question about emergency shelter. Vermont reported 3,295 people experiencing homelessness in 2023, up from just over 1,000 in 2020. This year, and as we speak, the state is rolling back its pandemic-era emergency shelter capacity across the state, which is pushing hundreds more Vermonters onto the streets. How will you approach the need for emergency shelter in the coming session, and how should the state pay for it? And we'll start with Irene Wrenner.
Well, we're going to pay either way. If we don't feed and shelter people, we're going to pay to deal with the crime and illnesses that result when people are neglected. The answer, I know, is not congregate shelters, which compound the antisocial behaviors for unhoused persons. Most shelters don't provide a safe place for people to sleep or a warm place for them to be during the day. They don't have cell service. They don't have showers. They don't have room to store belongings, and that has to change. Unhoused people deserve basic rights. Every one of them came from different circumstances. Some are still trying to work at jobs. Some of them lost their apartments when a landlord decided to move to a short-term rental because it was more lucrative. We should remember that people don't steal when they're not hungry. And people will work when they have a shower and a good night's sleep. I believe we should incentivize towns to determine where the so-called soft shelters could go. These don't cost an arm and a leg. Insulated tents are available for about $5,000 each. Compare that to the cost of building a concrete apartment, which is now way over $500,000 for the areas that the state is supporting. I drafted an amendment in May of 2023 to require every town that sought state assistance to complete a checklist and to help the state determine the best locations for housing their own unhoused populations. I would be glad to introduce it upon re-election.
Thank you very much, Irene. Chris Mattos, your thoughts on emergency shelter?
Yeah, homelessness has been a really big issue here in Vermont, and the last several years we've been doing the same thing over and over again by putting money towards a problem for temporary shelter. Instead of putting a Band-Aid on this problem, we need a long-term strategy to be able to increase the supply of housing in Vermont to get these folks invested in the workforce, if they can be, and into permanent homes. And if there's a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue, be able to get them the help they really need to be able to get back into being productive and being able to help support themselves. And the point is that subsidizing homelessness isn't the solution. It's getting folks on the path to finding the treatment they need or becoming productive members of the workforce so that they can find housing, and being able to build a permanent solution versus a temporary one.
Okay, Chris Mattos and Irene Wrenner running for the Chittenden North Senate seat. Thank you so much to both of you. That is all the time we have this evening. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you as well for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of the 2024 election. You can find this and many more programs on cctv.org/general, and tune into our election results show on November 5th after you cast your ballot. Thanks so much. Good night.